Look but don't touch. Tales of Iron is an excellent example of how far pristine packaging can take you. From the menu to the background art, this game is brimming with detail and charm. Highlights include the art style, narration, and sound effects. Combat is enjoyable, but only for a while. The game is missing that second gear, and I'll elaborate on that later on. Overall, I enjoyed this game and I'm optimistic for the sequel, but I don't quite love it. The game resurrects long dormant memories of reading Redwall during elementary school with its perfect storybook presentation and straightforward themes. I didn't enjoy my first pass at The Witcher 3, so I appreciated the voice acting on its own merits and not for the novelty of hearing Geralt's voice actor again.
Our captain's last act was to secure the village elder in the town hall and bar this gate to the frog horde. But some had got past him.
The narration is excellent in tone and frequency. It's pleasant without turning egregious and adds to the game's thoroughly enjoyable pop-up book feel. The sound effects are excellent, with my favorite being the health bottle refill. I even found the rat talk sound effect charming, though I wish there were more variety to it. Not having character dialogue puts a firm ceiling on character attachment. Some characters still have their moments, but those moments don't have the punch they could have had otherwise. If you hate the effect, you also have the menu option to turn off that chatter sound effect. Sadly, the game doesn't allow skipping the chatter. If you accidentally re-trigger chatter, you have to wait. It's minor as there isn't much of it in the game, but it's a small thing that kills the pace. The direction takes advantage of the art by zooming in and out as you traverse levels. It's a beautiful touch, and since playing Blasphemous a few years ago, I've become a sucker for dynamic camera moves in 2D games. You rebuild your base as the game goes along. The game does a great job of showing this in phases as you clear out more and more frogs and set more and more things right within the kingdom. You can see the rats in the background toiling away. You can see the dead bodies and you can see the decay. There's really great set direction and overall staging of each little element within the story. I just wish that I could talk to those characters more. Even a line or two of weird rat dialogue with a little bit more character detail would give me something to bite into. Whether linear or not, most of my favorite games give you the chance to see your impact on the game world. Tales of Iron isn't particularly dynamic, as despite sharing some of the trappings of a Metroid game, it is painfully linear at times. You can't pick up multiple side quests at once and handle them all in one go. You have to come back to the bulletin board or quest giver after each one. All in all, the game is beautiful in its presentation, but you can't interact with it on a deeper level. It's a pretty cruel state of affairs as it pulls you in, but just doesn't let you get to exactly where you want to go. Exploration is minor and nothing amazing. That wouldn't be a problem, however, the backtracking is tedious in stretches where you must raise money to finance the kingdom. It's not just the fact that you can't do multiple quests at once, it's that you can't stumble into most of these quests as well. Things are linear and inflexible. You have to wait for the story to hit a certain point before something can be done, even if it would have made sense for it to be there. This really dampens the potential of exploring and prevents you from feeling like you're charting your own course through the world. And even more grating is the fact that this game is missing exciting traversal mechanics. You're a rat, but you feel bumbly to a great degree. Where's my ability to get on all fours and move quickly? Where's my ability to swing across a chasm with my tail? This is one area where the game's limited scope hurts the most. Your jump makes more sense if it were assigned to a real human. It's not athletic at all, and it doesn't feel snappy. There's a lot of bulk to the motion. But the problem is, I'm a rat, and if I'm playing as a rat, I want to feel like a rat. The chatter system accomplishes that, even if I still complain about not having dialogue. But outside of the bouncy run, your core motions make more sense for a 6-foot-tall man than a rat. Better movement mechanics would not only improve traversal, they would also make combat more exciting. That's one of the core elements that makes Metroid and Castlevania games tick. Tales of Iron is not within either genre despite having some of those trappings, but I can't help but make that comparison and find Tales of Iron lackluster in that regard. When it comes to items, the art is very fitting and full of personality, and it really goes a long way to making an item feel like real progress. But the downside appears not in the presentation, but in the gameplay, as you don't really feel the drastic differences between items in a given class. It's to the point where I'd rather have most items just be skins. Let me use a superpowered spatula and I'd laugh myself to death throughout the whole game. However, the damage output is too low to just switch to whatever weapon you'd like. It's a lot to manage all the weaponry you receive as well. There are multiple pages per item type. Honestly, I wish there were fewer weapons with greater variation from one to the next, whether that be changes in the length of an attack or, special effects or multiple hits, just anything to mix it up than just getting stronger versions of the same thing. Combat is difficult but largely fair. Once the game balances out the time to kill, boss battles become more enjoyable. I often run boss battles with just a smidgen of health, and that really is what I'm looking for often. I'm looking for games where I can get that intensity of, okay, this is all going to come down to the last hit, but feel like I have a fair chance to actually make that last hit. The game is billed as a Souls-like, but I feel that's more so marketing than an accurate description of the game. There's nothing that you lose on death that you have to reacquire. There is no currency system that's earned enemy encounter by enemy encounter, so to speak. This eliminates the possibility of grinding, but it also reduces any kind of incentive or benefit from dealing with the mobs as you travel from one area to the next. The game also lacks any sort of RPG element that really lets you create a defined build with each run. You're not going to find a major difference in playing this game with an axe, a sword, or a spear. And you're also not going to really be able to get different branches of upgrade. There's some simple trading and gathering that leads to you getting items that you can then use to get upgrades to health as well as new weapons, but nothing that really lets you express yourself within those systems. Ultimately, this leads to this just being more so an action game that's ultimately trying to sell itself as something it's really not. At the beginning of the game, you're so weak that the time to kill isn't remotely satisfying. And sure, you don't have powerful weapons, but a dull sword, or even with the spatula skin, it ought to still feel like a sword. Decisive confrontations create more stunning moments than drawn out slugfests. And the combat improves as you get better weapons, and the battles finish more swiftly. The big flaw of this game, though, is the missing second gear that I alluded to earlier. From beginning to end, combat is almost entirely the same. You do gain the ability to poison enemies, but the ability is straightforward, without nuance, and without any kind of customization or expression. There are no interesting choices on when to use it. You get a few projectile weapons, but they auto-aim. You have limited ammunition for each one, and the projectiles are differentiated, but many of those differences don't feel crucial. Everything does damage, but there's not an interesting debuff or status change to be found. If this game were any longer, I'd count this demerit heavily against it. Instead, you can finish the main quest in under 10 hours, which keeps it from having too much stale playtime. There are no interesting gameplay wrinkles in the late game. Axes, swords, and spears apparently have different swing speeds, but that never seemed to matter for me. Simply put, this game desperately needed special attacks. This is the second area where the game's limited scope drastically lowers the ceiling of quality for the game. Block, roll, jump, swing. That formula is on the verge of getting stale in Elden Ring, and that game has the benefit of 3 dimensions and enough variety for 200 hours of playtime. Here, you're left with a very simple core game that never breaks out or forces you to devise an amazing solution to the game's challenges. You have to wait for bosses to do what they're going to do. You can never really set the tone and the pace of a battle. Altogether, I had a good time even if I didn't love the game in a warm, fuzzy way. For all my complaints, Tales of Iron is excellently scoped. It's the product of a studio making a calculated release that bit off exactly as much as they could chew. In a rather criminal oversight, I've forgotten to mention the attention to detail with the atmospheric music and how much of the soundtrack is played by characters in-world. It's a really cool touch that you can see in multiple boss fights, particularly here with the bard in the background. Presentation is top-notch, from Reggie's herky-jerky walk cycle to the UI to the camera placement as you move through the levels. The attention to detail as the world shifts through key moments gives a very real sense of progression in a game with no real twists or turns. This story doesn't set out to be anything more than a by-the-numbers, princely, coming-of-age, heroic fantasy tale. Seeing the kingdom go from peace to ruin to golden era is exactly what you'd expect, and it's very satisfying all the while. That's a real shame because there's potential for something much greater here. The presentation is polished on all fronts, well beyond what you would expect for just a simple indie game. But that masks a very rudimentary core game design. A more robust version of this game would likely be excellent. I've already wishlisted the sequel in hopes that Odd Bug will deliver just that. I'm not in the business of overhyping, so I'll probably pay little attention to the sequel until it shows up on a Steam sale. That's not a big demerit though, as I have the same overflowing backlog as all the rest of you. As always, everything I do is sponsored by yours truly. So you can support my work by buying my work via links in the description or in my About page. My latest novel is titled Coordinated Universal Time Travel, and I'm also working on an African fantasy action adventure series called Lord of Vipers. I'll tell you more about that one soon.